Hello, and falling in line with the standard variable rate for mortgage lending at the moment, this is Seven. And I'm your host and principal, Matthew Mills. And as many of you know, I actually wear glasses most of the time, which I didn't have on when I had this photograph taken. So just in case, with no expense whatsoever being spared, we've used cutting edge CGI technology to show you what that might look like. As the cost of borrowing adds to the cost of living crisis, these are more contingency sufficiencies, or how to win the battle against rising costs and the influence of affordability. And at the time of recording, interest rates have been rising at their highest and fastest rate in decades. And as of today, the Bank of England raised the central bank's borrowing rate to 5%, a rate we've not seen since 2008, which also means that mortgage lenders who tend to charge a bit of a premium on top of the central bank's lending rate, the average variable rate for a homeowner on their mortgage now has risen to 7%. And I have to say as well, I know that's the name of the company, but this actually has nothing to do with us and is purely a coincidence. So why have the Bank of England raised interest rates? Well, it's because of inflation, price inflation, which is remaining stubbornly entrenched in the United Kingdom. Now, in our previous lecture, rather than me going on about it now, in the previous lecture, we've kind of traced the roots of this inflation and the sequence of events that have led to it. So rather than repeat myself here, I'm going to put a link and you can go back and you can watch that if you like. But we can trace it back basically to the credit crunch in 2007, 2008, then the effects of the global pandemic and paying for that. That was then compounded by Brexit and supply chain issues, and then latterly Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the effect on constraints of fuel and the increase in fuel prices. And as if that wasn't all bad enough, we then have the influence of these two individuals, our last two chancellors of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng on the left here and Jeremy Hunt on the right. Kwasi Kwarteng serving one of the shortest terms ever for a chancellor. His plan was to deal with an absolutely staggering and unsupportable level of government debt by borrowing an even more staggering and unsupportable sum of money. However, internationally, this was seen as a very, very bad step because the increased borrowing raised doubts over the UK's ability to pay. That reduced confidence in the UK economy. That reduced the value of sterling. That meant that imports were more expensive, and it pushed price inflation up. Now, one of the ways that the Bank of England deals with inflation is to hit us in the back pocket by increasing the cost of borrowing and reducing our disposable income. And that's what this response has been about today. So Kwasi Kwarteng was very quickly shown the door, and Jeremy Hunt was ushered in to deal with the consequences of his policies. And the principal thing he had to deal with was the loss of confidence in the UK government and its ability to repay its debts, and that leads on to higher interest payments from the UK government that it has to find the money for. And he did that by increasing tax revenues. Specifically, what he did was to reduce or freeze our tax allowances, which means the amount of money that we can all earn before we pay tax. That has the practical effect on us that we have a lower level of disposable income. That happens as the cost of borrowing has gone up and our mortgage rates have gone up. So we have lower disposable income to meet higher household costs, which have been compounded today as the Bank of England, in an attempt to deal with inflation, has put interest rates up even further. So, oh my goodness, prices are rising in double digits. Interest rates and the cost of borrowing and running our household is rising at the highest rate that anyone can remember in decades, and it all looks just a little bit bleak. Well, step in the hero of the piece, and that is contingency planning. This is the often overlooked but absolutely fundamental bedrock of financial planning, the point of which is to ensure that we actually foresee and deal with potential risks and manage them in such a way that in the medium and longer term, they don't derail our financial planning and us meeting our financial objectives. And I've summarized them here basically as a 4-point mnemonic. It's absolutely awful, but I hope you remember it, which is plan for the worst, hope for the best, see the world as it really is, and you won't get too stressed. So here is a 6-point buffer builder plan to hopefully head off some of the implicit risks in the rising cost of borrowing and the rising cost of living. First one is don't procrastinate. Humans have an amazing ability to stick their head in the sand and not actually face reality. Now, for many of us, while the interest rate for the Bank of England has gone up today, mortgage rates won't go up immediately, so we've got a little bit of time to plan. And the sooner you plan, the more effective it's likely to be. The next thing is to review discretionary expenditure. So typically we have two types of expenditure. We've got the essential stuff, which is paying for the house and maintaining ourselves. And then we've got discretionary expenditure, things we might like to have rather than need to have. And it's a useful exercise to go through and identify some of those, because you might well find a significant margin in there. Next thing to do is to earmark some emergency funds, just some readily accessible funds that you can get at if you really, really need to in a pinch. Probably also not a bad idea to keep these in a separate account where you have to work some to actually get at them to avoid the temptation to just go out and spend them. After that, many of us have invested assets, and usually they're not just in one place, because it's not a good idea to have all your eggs in one basket. And some of those assets would be more readily accessible or more stable assets, cash and the like, than others like equities. And we might identify those assets that in a real emergency, if we can't reduce our discretionary expenditure further, if we've dipped into our emergency funds, they look like they're about to exhausted, that we might start thinking about collapsing down from some of our investments, and the readily accessible near cash assets might be the place that we would start. Now, while we're hoping for the best, obviously we're going to plan for the worst. And one of the things we absolutely should do is have some disaster planning built in here. So a lot of affordability assumptions are predicated on us continuing to work and being able to work. And it is entirely possible that we may encounter misfortune and be unable to do so. So it's really wise to actually just have a look at our contingency planning. This is our income protection insurances, our medical insurances, our critical illness insurances and such, to make sure that they're in place and up to date and will actually provide us the kind of benefits that we need should we really need to rely on them. Another point related to that is it is entirely possible that we might be paying more than we actually need to for our disaster contingency planning, and we might be able to rationalise and save some money there. Final point is keep some perspective. There's a real tendency to overweight the importance of current events compared to where we've been and where we might go in the future. So we overweight their importance. It's a human trait to do that. Now, while inflation is running hot at the moment, and the Bank of England have felt to raise interest rates again to, as Jeremy said, eye-watering levels, this too will pass, and it's entirely likely that inflation will start to come down. There's every indication that it's starting to do so, at least in most quarters, and that this too will end. So let's also remember that this is part of a cycle, is likely to change, and this too will end. And there you are, short and sweet, just a reminder maybe of the basic principles of contingency planning. But what have we learned? Well, the first and foremost is that the cost of living is rising, and the cost of owning and running a household or buying a household is part of that, and that has gone up today. However, the take home from this lecture, and it is a lecture, is that we are all going to become buffer builders. And we've given a 6-point plan to build a financial buffer against the contingencies of continued rising costs of living. The final point is let's not make a drama out of this. Let's keep it in perspective. Let's recognise that this is part of a cycle and that this too shall end. Speaking of which, this is the end of this lecture. Of course, it would be absolutely incomplete without the inevitable disclaimer. And it's just to remind you again that this video is intended to inform, to educate and to entertain, and most certainly does not represent advice in any way, shape or form. Beyond that, we'll look forward to seeing you next time.